According to world best practice, it takes a tripartite structure which includes the government, employers of labor, and organized labor themselves to achieve decent work in the workplace. Hello and welcome to Labor Lens. I am Sharon Ijason. On this week's episode of the program, we'll be exploring the avenue of the employers and how decent work can be achieved. We will be right back.
The Industrial Training Fund was established to promote and encourage the acquisition of skills in commerce and industry with a view to generating a pool of indigenous trained manpower sufficient to meet the needs of the economy. Nigeria is one country saddled with a high rate of unemployment. A report by the National Bureau of Statistics states that the number of unemployed Nigerians rose from 3.3 million to 20.9 million in the third quarter of 2018. The federal government is trying hard to reverse these negative statistics through the Industrial Training Fund, which is set to commence its 2019 Skills Intervention Program. The trainees will be empowered with startup kits.
No reasonable analysis will divorce unemployment from the needless incidences of violence that have claimed thousands of lives across the nation. It will equally be difficult to separate rising criminality and harmful social vices that are being perpetrated by Nigerians because of unemployment and the attendant poverty.
The 2019 intervention program will cover 11 areas to give room for more participants.
The Women's Skills Empowerment Program WASEP will target 360 women. The Air Conditioning and Refrigeration Training on Wheels will train 90 Nigerians. The Design and Garment Making Training on Wheels is equally 90 trainees. The Skills Training and Empowerment Program for the Physically Challenged Step C will tackle 120 trainees. The Construction Skills Empowerment Program concept is going to target 180 Nigerians.
It may be but a drop in the ocean, but the federal government is depending on interventions like this to help reduce the rate of unemployment.
As organized labor seemed to have reached crossroads with the federal government over the consequential adjustment of the new minimum wage, Nigerian workers are now seeking support from the global labor body UNIGLOBAL. Speaking at the opening ceremony of the 2 days 21st Uni-Africa Executive Committee meeting in Lagos recently, General Secretary of the Congress, Comrade Peter Ozo-Eson, lamented that it took members of the organized labor 3 years to complete the process of the negotiations, which implementation is now being stalled by the consequential adjustment of the salary scales.
The implementation of that law has not taken off, and challenges face us to do the negotiation about how that law will impact the consequential table for public sector workers. And that process has stalled, and therefore there are struggles ahead that we must wage.
The new Trade Union Congress President, Comrade Quadri Olaleye, in his address tasked UNIGLOBAL to make issues affecting workers in the continent their major concern.
It must be stated here that trade unions are important institutions for fostering unity and thus strengthening democracy in Africa. Hence, all hands must be on deck to ensure this is achievable. However, the entire TUC members are using this occasion to charge the executive member to display exemplary leadership style, shun individualism, and have the grace to pilot the affairs of UNIGLOBAL Africa to the promised land.
The Secretary General of UNIGLOBAL, Christian Hoffman, who said the meeting was our first executive in Africa after our election last year and our first time to visit Nigeria, condemned the fact that workers have continued to struggle against the odds to win at the bargaining table.
support our affiliates and we bring our unions together so that they can share solidarity with one another, in particular with the same employers. And when we talk about casualization, that's a problem happening everywhere. And we have to get our employers in the room, we have to get the politicians in the room and negotiate solutions to increasing casualization of the workforce. Because sometimes you have permanent workers alongside the casual workforce, the agency, the labor brokers, the outsource, working side by side doing the same thing. We have to put a stop to that. And together, by coordinating strategies with the same employers, we can do that. When it comes to the minimum wage, that's a national political choice, but from the global point of view, we are fighting for every worker in the world to have a living minimum wage. So there should not be anybody who earns less than a living wage. And so we would add our voice to all the organizations internationally and nationally that want to encourage your government to move forward. So that's the contribution that we make in that arena, because not having a minimum wage or having a minimum wage that's too low really falls below global standards. We need to lift up the bottom. We need to also lift up the middle, but from the point of view of poverty, we have to lift up the bottom and ensure that there is that floor of protection.
It was concluded at the event that Uniglobal is committed to the International Labour Organization Declaration, which sees a future with social justice, human-centered future, with workers and social dialogue at the core.
This meeting is the fourth in the series for these ECOWAS Ministers of Labour and Employment. Having met for 2 days, the Social Dialogue Forum, a meeting of experts, came up with 2 documents. They are believed to be frameworks that ECOWAS and member states can apply to achieve the International Labour Organization Centenary Declaration for the Future of Work. Participants are optimistic implementation of these frameworks will promote decent work for the citizens of the sub-region.
We urge you, honorable ministers, to adopt the text that will be presented to you and all the recommendations therein to enable the ECOWAS Commission to put in place regional mechanisms that facilitate and enhance the social integration of our citizens in our community space.
Your meeting today will mark the beginning of a new lease in the life of tripartite within the 15 countries of our sub-region.
As you know, the future of work is already with us here. So the question is, how well are we prepared as ECOWAS to be able to meet the challenges of a changing world and a changing workplace?
The task before the 15 Ministers of Labour and Employment at this gathering is to look through these 2 documents and ratify. Nigeria's representative at the forum pledges to support the regional body in the implementation of its labour and employment programs and policies. He stresses the need for member states to exert the political will and domesticate the frameworks in the overall interest of the sub-region. The ECOWAS Commission created the Conference of Labour and Employment Ministers in 2006 to strengthen dialogue, coordinate and collaborate among member states in labour and employment matters.
Workers in Nigeria and workers in the United States are facing the same challenges: precarious work, the failure of having a vibrant social contract. We're here to say we are going to reinvigorate that social contract, demanding that all workers have rights, have dignity, have social protections. We heard from Brother Ayuba that most workers in the world don't even know they have those rights. And so we are here to demand of the governments and employers of the world that we are here to get a new contract, to work with them and make sure it's implemented in all of our countries. We have the biggest issue, which is there's not even equal pay for women doing the same types of work. And we're here to negotiate the most historic treaty our world has ever seen to end violence and harassment in the world of work. The numbers are astonishing. There is not a sector and there is not a country where this is not an egregious problem. Women experience it whether they have to risk their lives to get a job with a male manager or the day-to-day aggressions they face in the workplace. Many governments have no laws to protect them. Many women have felt voiceless. This new international treaty gives us a powerful global tool that we're then going to take back to our countries and start ratification campaigns. We can do it, and we're going to change the situation for workers that have faced violence and harassment for too long in the workplace.
Because the ILO is based on tripartism, African representation or government representation is quite important as well. The African group has been quite largely historically supportive of demands by the working group, and we are able to support the African positions on that because we believe that their adequate representation will improve governance of the ILO. So that has been quite important. But from the point of view of the working group, some of the things that have been most important to us have been given the changes in the world of work, how to ensure that workers' rights, fundamental rights, remain preserved, and that the work of the ILO will always be centered on the promotion of workers' rights. And there have been various issues that have brought this to the fore. We have won some, we have lost some in terms of adopting wordings, but generally we are looking forward to having a resolution adopted at the end of the work of the committee that will meet the aspirations of the working group.
Decent work, your assessment?
Yeah, I think generally we agree that innovation is the order of the day anywhere in the world, both in developed and developing countries. But one aspect we just have to be careful is the issue of digitalization. Because if you draw a quick conclusion on digitalization, you may also be cutting short the expectation of Africa. A developing country, in as much as we agree that the use of technology is quite apt in order to fast track and attain our expectation, we should also be mindful of the fact that whatever program we drive should be labor intensive, because we have unemployment challenge in Africa, especially in Nigeria. Unemployment problem will be better solved when more people are involved in driving programs. And that is why the use of people than robots is what I advocate for Africa. I agree with the world that digitalization is coming, but I don't think it's coming to replace the work of man in Africa. So that is where I have a challenge. And in as much as we are supporting the program, we are also conscious that what we need as a country today is to solve unemployment problem. And I don't think robots can do that for us. So whatever we do, we must believe that everyone belongs to a class in terms of development.
On the profile interview segment this week, I will be speaking with the Director General of the Nigeria Employers Consultative Association. It tells me the steps that can be taken by employers to achieve decent work. Take a listen. It's good to have you on the program.
Thank you. My pleasure.
A lot has been happening during the ongoing ILO Centenary celebration. I would like to ask you, from the employer's perspectives, what has been your observation so far?
The International Labour Conference of 2019 is very unique in several dimensions. The first is the fact that it is the centenary celebration. But beyond the celebration, there are technical activities that are actually taking place that portends very serious implication for the world of work. And I think that is the aspect that we are really interested in and where we have much of the take-home. One of it, beyond the regular committee on application of standards that's taking place, is the technical committee that was set up that started in 2018, that's concluding its work in 2019, and that's the Committee on Violence and Harassment. And this is very, very instructive, as it has far-reaching implications on the world of work. There is a redefinition of what the concept of violence and harassment is. There is the dimension of domestic violence with the attendant implications on the world of work, and the aspect of responsibility of employers vis-a-vis the culpable person at the home front with regards to the aspect of violence. And of course, several other implications which are very important for us to take back home to educate our members on how they should relate and interact with regards to this development in the world of work. And the other aspect, which I also think is very important, is the committee of the whole, which is basically an agenda setting committee that's reviewing ILO and its achievements in the past 100 years, what it has done well, the gaps observable, what ILO is supposed to be doing again in the next 100 years, setting the framework of what is expected of stakeholders, employers, workers, and government in the framework that will guide all our activities in the next 100 years. And of course, it's going to also set timelines on all these benchmarks. And a review is supposed to take place in the year 2030.
You're representing the Employers Association.
Yes.
And I want you to share with us what the message you have for your members, who are actually employers, in terms of what they have to do in practical terms to ensure that violence and harassment in the workplace is put to an end.
As a matter of fact, employers globally, not only NECA, has always said they are against any form of violence and any behavior that is unacceptable, both at the home front and in the world of work. What is happening here is just reinforcing that opinion and that belief. With regards to what our position should be in guiding our members back home, there are salient matters that has arisen in the course of looking into details what violence and harassment is. Number one, the definition which had been bandied about before, we believe is not exhaustive enough. There's also the issue of what aspect of it constitutes violation of human rights. Violence and harassment are two different ballgames. Harassment does not necessarily lead to violence. It might be subtle. However, there are aspects of it that are very important and should be of concern to us as employers of labor. Number one, let me give an instance. There is the issue of an employee, a female employee, who hypothetically is abused by her spouse at the home front. And because of that, she's incapacitated from working. There is the loss of productivity. In time past, it's just taken as one of those things, oh, you can take time off. When you are ready, come back to work. But employers are now looking at the details. Who takes responsibility for the loss of productivity? And that is actually food for thought. Beyond that, while it is not an occupational hazard and the attack or the violence did not take place in the world of work, in the work environment, who takes care of the medicals? Is it still the employer? What is the liability of the spouse at home that is responsible for the whole problem, the hazard or the injury? Must the employer take responsibility for the negligence or irresponsibility of the spouse? those are analysis, which is just one example of the several analysis of breakdown of the dimensions of the issue of violence. I've just looked at the aspect of domestic, how it impacts on the workplace. And there are many more examples like that. So the take home is that while it is still work in progress and no conclusion yet, is for us to distill all these salient issues and points, and as employers to take it back home and look at it within the Nigeria context, to be able to say how does it apply on us, how does it apply to us, and which of it can we live with, which of it can we try and situate within our local environment and make points for action that we can implement.
Moving forward, we all know that ILO is celebrating its centenary, and there's a lot of expectation about what's next in the next 100 years. I am aware that you served in the Committee of the Whole. What should Nigerian workers or workers across the globe be expecting?
Beyond setting agenda on what are those things that employers can do to continue to improve on the lifestyle of their workers and their comfort, the Committee of Whole is also looking at the aspects that also impacts on their employers as well. And two basic aspects of it are important. Number one, we are looking at going forward that there should be enabling environment which is driven by policy for the creation of a conducive environment for employers or organized businesses to thrive, to be able to create jobs as well as to retain existing jobs. And this will also enable them to also improve on the issue of decent work, which has been of importance in recent time.
We are aware that many labor leaders across the world actually want new social contracts, and we also know that they want social justice to prevail. What more can the employers in Nigeria do to achieve decent work, especially with the facts that we know that many workers actually work longer hours than they actually signed up for?
You know, responsibility begets responsibility. When you talk of decent work, social justice, there are two sides to it. One side is the obligation of employer. The other side is the obligation of the regulator to ensure that the employer is empowered and there is conducive environment for it to be able to deliver on those expectations from it. And I've touched on it briefly before with regards to a conducive environment for the employer to be able to create jobs, a conducive environment for the employer to be able to play his role with regards to his obligations. And part of social justice that you are talking about is equitable pay for equitable work done. Is part of the issue of social protection, which also talks about obligations, not only of the worker but of employer to contribute to the issue of pension for the worker, so that after gainful employment, life thereafter, it can have quality life as well. One of it again is the issue of social protection with regards to employee compensation scheme, which is also the responsibility of employer, and so on and so forth. But what I'm saying is that employers in Nigeria are alive to their responsibility, but employers are also looking at government not only to continue with its project on ease of doing business, but also to make sure that other regulatory agencies that are under its purview also live up to the expectation with regards to government's desire of creating an enabling environment for business to thrive.
It was an interesting conversation I had with you.
It's a pleasure being here. Thank you.
That's all we can take on today's edition of the program. Join us next week for a continuation on the series of the centenary celebration of the International Labour Organization. Thanks for watching, and remember, labor creates wealth.